The whip rules, they're going to start from the 1st of May, and this is going to cause big changes to way a lot of our drivers drive.
Well, Greg, in New South Wales, it'd be disappointing if we don't get a commitment from the drivers, but because I think it's from about July last year, we flagged to drivers in our industry in New South Wales that this change was coming, and in fact, Reid Sanders and myself and management had considered invoking a local rule to bring it on sooner than it has from an Australian or a national perspective. There are reasons why HRA decided not to push forward prior to the 1st of May, but they've now been given 2 months' notice, so the information has been available to drivers for the last 2 months to understand what their requirements were. I guess from my perspective, being new into the industry in January 2015, it was the lack of commitment that some of the major players in our industry seem to have towards the whip rules, and it was my view that this lack of commitment was shown up in the sense that reprimands that were issued under the New South Wales penalty guidelines policy were treated as a convenience rather than a deterrent. So in other words, the driver had more or less deliberately wait till he was escaped his 28 days reset, and then there'd be a breach of the rules. He'd be reprimanded, he'd have to wait another 28 days. And in that sense, I'd have to say I'd be critical of drivers in that they were aware of that, and it wasn't a sense of I have to conform to the rule, is I'll do my best, but if I need to break it, I'll break it. And with that in mind, the Harness Racing New South Wales on Monday issued a set of penalty guidelines for the new whip rules to commence on the 1st of May, and there are no reprimands. So drivers under the new whip rules need to understand that the first penalty will be a $200 fine. The second penalty, if it occurs within 60 drives or 60 days, whichever occurs first, would be a $400 fine. And from the $400 fine, the next penalty will be a $400 fine and a 7-day suspension. So it may be considered by some as an incorrect attitude. I personally make no apology for it, and I'm sure that neither does Reid Sanders, in that I'd like it to be considered to be tough love. We require drivers to commit to the new rules. It's important to our industry to present our product in the wagering marketplace in the most acceptable and contemporary manner, and it'll be disappointing to me personally if we've got to take a heavy stick to drivers simply because of non-compliance.
There's a few little issues that drivers need to be aware of. Firstly is the loose reining. That's now, you cannot do that.
Well, in fairness, you haven't been able to, Greg, but I guess it's a double-edged sword. If you want people to practice in having a rein in each hand, and they take a little while to be able to master the idea, then that's one thing. But on the other hand, it'll be something completely different if a person doesn't seek to continue to improve their action, and therefore you've got reins flapping across the horse's rump or hind quarters in also a whipping fashion, and that'll be deemed to be loose reining, and that'll be a breach of the rules.
And the other one is continually hitting the horse, especially in a driving finish. Under the new rules, you've got to give the horse a chance to respond to the use of the whip.
Greg, we'd say that that's always been the case. If you look at the current rule, the word excessive is there, and it's described in a part of the rule, but at the same time takes its own definition. And in literal terms, excessive is too much. And on Saturday night, we had reason to speak to a driver who had managed to make contact. That's incorrect. Managed to use the whip or appear to use the whip on more than 40 occasions in the straight. Now, by anybody's interpretation, that is just an incorrect use of the whip. It would be excessive, irrespective of where the horse is in the race. The horse certainly hadn't been given a chance to respond, and in that case, the driver was eligible for a reprimand and was given a reprimand, but could easily have been given a penalty purely and simply because we've discussed it with the driver in the previous occasions. I think there's nothing worse than seeing a driver who continues to apply the whip, and the argument will be that some of the female drivers don't necessarily use the whip with the same force as the male, and that's understood, but nevertheless it's a mindless robotic action which doesn't do their own add credibility to their own driving.
And if people are breaking the rules, will the stewards look for protests to become a part of it, like that we've seen in the gallops in Queensland?
Yeah, our view under the current rules, Greg, is that there's no ability to object in respect of a decision under the whip rules.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right then, Graham, thanks for that, and we'll speak with you next week.
Pleasure, Greg.